This is fascinating to me. I saw this article from the National Association of Evangelicals, and I was shocked by what they reported here. This is, again, look at the website, National Association of Evangelicals. This is the group, by the way, that used to be led by Ted Haggard. If you are old like me, you remember Ted Haggard. He was one of the most famous white evangelical preachers, very big in the anti-gay aughts. And then, of course, like the previous story, he was caught paying a male escort for sexual things and drugs. And then he lost his job with the NAE and he had to start a church in a different area where nobody watches him anymore. That's the National Association of Evangelicals. Anyway, here's this article on their website. Should pastors endorse politicians from the pulpit? I mean, the answer is no. It should be a one-word article. It is not. But this is what's amazing in the article. The vast majority of evangelical leaders, 98%, say that pastors should not endorse politicians from the pulpit, according to a evangelical leaders survey. 98%? Are you kidding me? Really? Wow. And then they quote the current president of the NAE, Walter Kim. The pulpit should be used in a prophetic manner, bringing the gospel to bear on today's complex cultural issues. Church leaders should inform, uplift, and draw people into deeper discipleship that impacts how they engage. Okay, I don't care. His quote is very boring. But the argument that they're basically making is if you're an evangelical pastor, you should spend your time in the pulpit telling people about Jesus, winning them over to get born again. You should be spreading the gospel, and talking about anything else is a distraction from that message. That's basically what he's saying, which I understand, but I am shocked that 98% of evangelical leaders said, of course you should not preach politics from the pulpit, because that doesn't match up with my experience covering these people at all. They actually said that 98% number is up from the last time they did this survey, which was, what's the date on this? 2017. And that time it was nearly 90%. It was actually 89% if you look at this image. 89% used to say no. And now, like 7 years later, it's 98%. So, wow, we've had a big epiphany on this issue. None of these pastors thinks you should preach politics from the pulpit. Except that's not what actually happens, right? We know there is no shortage of pastors who spread messages that are anti-LGBTQ. I just showed you one. Or they talk about things, they spread messages that are anti-abortion, anti-science, anti-sex, anti-environment, anti-civil rights, anti-women, right? None of that is directly political per se, but Republicans usually run on those culture war issues instead of like the economy. Why? Because they know this is the good stuff. This is what gets our base riled up. So pastors don't necessarily have to tell their congregation how to vote. They can just say, this church is 100% pro-life. Wink, wink. And that does the trick. They don't have to tell you who to vote for, but also only one candidate is also pro-life. And the hint gets through. So, like, even if you say don't endorse candidates from the pulpit, isn't that what they're doing when they talk about these culture war issues, right? You don't have to give them a name when the winks serve the same purpose, okay? But even beyond that, we know there are pastors who actually do tell their congregations how to vote. And I've talked about this before, so I'm not going to rehash all of this. But the IRS is so lenient when it comes to the rules about what nonprofit groups are allowed to do or not do if they want to maintain their tax-exempt status. There is a rule called the Johnson Amendment that says nonprofits cannot tell people how to vote. That's it. You can't tell people what to do on their ballots. But plenty of conservative pastors still argue that's too much. We still want to tell people how to vote. We want to have our cake and eat it too. And they've deliberately tried to get the IRS to revoke their tax exemptions so that they could sue the IRS. Like, it's so bad that there are pastors who will tell the congregation how to vote, get a video of that, and then send it to the IRS, basically daring them to revoke the church's tax exemptions. And amazingly, the IRS will not do it. They have not revoked a church's tax exempt status for like decades. And even then, it was like one church. It's only happened like one verifiable time. So the IRS isn't going to do anything about it. So these churches have started endorsing candidates. If they're not directly endorsing candidates, they are talking about culture war issues because that serves the same purpose. It gets their congregations to vote for a Republican. Doesn't matter how horrible the Republican candidate is. Like, as I'm making this video, Donald Trump just gave a deranged, lunatic press conference this afternoon. He has no business getting anywhere near the White House again. But there are a lot of pastors who are like, you know what? I don't care. I'm not in this for the country. I'm not in this for to help the people. I'm in it because we think that's what God wants. And they'll still tell their congregations to vote for the Republican. So where the hell did this idea come from that 98% of evangelical leaders do not want pastors promoting politics in the pulpit? So I went looking for that answer. And it turns out the only thing that you find in that article is this disclaimer at the very, very bottom of it. And I want you to read this with me because I was looking for the actual data. Like, where's the survey? I want to see the methodology and who did you survey? And this is all I wrote to them. They did not respond to me. But look at this. The Evangelical Leaders Survey is a monthly poll of the board of directors of the National Association of Evangelicals. They did a survey of their buddies, and that's it. They include the CEOs of denominations and representatives of a broad array of evangelical organizations, including missions, universities, publishers, and churches. They asked their friends, hey, everybody who works for the National Association of Evangelicals, you know how every day we tell people that they should be spreading the gospel? Do you think people should be talking about politics instead of the gospel? And everyone's like, no, they should stick to the gospel. And then they printed it as if it was a legit survey. And I want you to look at their board of directors here because that's up on their website. Like, they have their full board of directors. Many of these people, I'm not going to go through all of them, but many of these people do not even run churches. They're just people who are administrators for Christian ministries or things like that. And if they're the ones answering your poll, like, they have no idea what's going on in churches, or they don't care that pastors do whatever the hell they want. So, okay, definitely not a scientific poll. So then I was trying to figure out, like, well, what is the actual answer? What percentage of sermons are political? And the closest answer I could find is that the Pew Research Center, a couple years ago, they did a survey where they asked believers, hey, how many times has your pastor mentioned the election? This is in 2021. They said last year, how often did your pastor mention the election in some way or another? So how often did they talk about politics? Now that question will get you a lot more honest of an answer. Not what should pastors do, but what did your pastor do? And check out the answers they got for this one here. 2/3 of congregations heard at least one sermon mentioning the election. And if you look right here on the left side, you could see 67% of churches shared at least one sermon mentioning the election. And among evangelical Protestants, it was 71%. By the way, they didn't even break it down to white evangelicals, because I suspect white evangelicals would be even higher, right? So when they ask believers, it's like, yeah, pretty much 2/3 of the churches in the country promote politics or talk about politics in the pulpit. So this idea that, well, we shouldn't be doing that, guess what? It's happening anyway. All right. Now, what bugs me about this is not the near unanimity of NAE board members who say pastors shouldn't endorse candidates. It's how they ignore how it's already happening. The number of people who think falsely that the gospel message transcends politics, and who think if you stay centered on biblical truth, it can be separated from telling people which party to support. Like, how naive are these people? And the amazing thing is they have the power to do something about this, because if the NAE actually gave a damn about this issue and they wanted pastors to stop promoting politics from the pulpit and telling people how to vote. You know what they could do? They could say that if a pastor endorses a candidate, we're going to kick your church out of the NAE, and we're going to publicly say that. They could do that. They could publicly condemn churches that try to tip the scales for a particular candidate. I don't care if it's symbolic only. That would have an impact, but they won't do that because none of them care. And if someone breaks the rules and preaches politics anyway, they don't mind because, frankly, they want the Republicans to win too. They all exist to spread misinformation and make members of their congregations feel like victims. Like, that's why Jesus is an afterthought at so many churches, because they've just become functional arms of the GOP. And frankly, pastors tend to think there's so much at stake in the political world, and that is a more important deal than the eternal consequences of what you do. So they only focus on politics anyway. So don't believe this number that 98% of pastors don't think, or 98% of evangelical leaders don't think pastors should promote politics from the pulpit, because most of them are doing it anyway, and these people are just sticking their heads in the sand and doing nothing about it.